unfolding together in Dialogue Village.
Right. Hi, Klas. Really great to meet you in this format. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Great. And whereabouts are you in the world?
I am in the archipelago outside Stockholm in Sweden.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in the southwest of France, just for some context as well. Now, we've met through a mutual friend and online. We've never spoken before live, but we've had some exchanges on the forum, on the Dialogue Village, and that's our mutual interest. And I've been reading through our textual conversations with a renewed interest. But before we get onto that and deconstructing this whole thing about dialogue, whether it's spoken or textual, I just wanted to introduce you to our listeners who are the third element, the third person here in this conversation. And as far as I'm aware, a really interesting background, not wholly intentional, but a background in computer and system science. And I've seen it written that you're an authority in the field of complex configuration systems. Tell me a little bit about that route and eventually what brought you to where you are now with dialogue.
So I was a researcher in artificial intelligence in the 1990s, and that work led me to co-found a software company where we developed software for doing what's called product configuration. It's a very expertise-intensive task in the manufacturing industry, where experts are called in to customize products for customers. So it's complex machinery, trucks, that kind of thing that are always sold in different configurations. And it's very difficult to keep track of which combinations of options are compatible.
I think that answers a question for me about your PhD in the methodology for creating models of expert knowledge. And when I saw that phrase, expert knowledge, I was like, what is this? Sounds a bit magical. But now I realize it's in the context of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's correct. And this approach to modeling expertise is something which is not that feasible for most kinds of expertise. But in the manufacturing industry, where they are working on well-defined products, the expertise can actually be well-defined as well. So it's possible to model that.
Fabulous. So how much of a leap is it for you to get from there to where you are now, in I suppose for the sake of the listener?
Well, I mean, I was always interested in understanding human interpersonal human communication. That's always been my greatest interest. So I bumped into computer science more as a way of making a living, and I was interested in artificial intelligence as a way to try to understand some of the aspects of human intelligence that I was interested in. But I was more interested in, I mean, my professional interest was in developing software that could be used practically. So that's why we went into this model-based approach of building software. So I co-founded a software company around that. And this was in 1998, so 24 years ago. And that company has grown over the years, and when you build an organization, you of course run into these interpersonal topics that I'm also interested in, and that I've actually had a stronger passion for myself. But I found that was a really challenging area that organizing lots of people, recruiting and getting everybody to work well together was quite challenging. And I discovered how little managers actually know about that. I mean, we tried to recruit people who had experience in doing this, and I learned that that experience is not that well founded. So I came to realize that I really ought to try to devote my efforts to understanding more about the interpersonal side instead. I decided to try to make myself redundant in the organization.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. My mind's doing some major leaps still between artificial intelligence, between obviously communicating with colleagues in a sensitive way that's already probably innate in you, that's growing inside of you, that needs to communicate in a more genuine and I think this sense of feeling that comes up in your writing, this intuitive side, and also there's a tension there with the academic as well, defending your theses. You know, and the way that education works in the West is very strongly opinionated and competitive, coming down to, you know, debates and conversation, the way society is built. Where would you like to go with this conversation now?
Yeah, so I left the business world more or less 7 years ago. And I still remain on the board of the company that I co-founded, but I spent most of my time just trying to understand the things that I wish I understood when we started the company, you could say. So I've been on a learning journey since I have a background in research myself. My approach was to try to find out what research is there about how human cooperation really works, because I felt that we lack insight into that. So I wanted to find out what well-founded insights are there. And I discovered that there isn't all that much consensus about it, actually. and it seemed to me that I could see the same kind of pattern in the research as I could see in my organizational life, that the problem is that people don't understand each other. And especially when we disagree about something, we tend to more or less deliberately almost misunderstand each other. And it seemed to me that there are constellations, there are situations when people can remain curious about what each other means, and really explore things with curiosity, and explore disagreements with curiosity to try to learn something from it. There are such situations. There's a quality of conversation that sometimes emerges where people can remain curious and explore things, and that's where real innovation happens in my experience.
So is the tension in society to do with I mean, without wanting to go down too many grand assumptions and sweeping statements, there's something there about power dynamics and vulnerability as a tension in our very being. Probably, again, I'm not sure if this is true, but it feels like more like a Western phenomenon.
Yeah. I think there is something having to do with domination and disciplining and so on, the way that goes on in modern society.
And then of course we get called snowflakes for actually saying that we're vulnerable nowadays.
So I think the power dynamics is one aspect that prevents this kind of understanding, because we need to be able to trust each other and to show we don't always know what we're talking about, to admit our mistakes and so on. So the power dynamics get in the way of that, I think, and also it makes people defensive of their own opinions. It feels like a loss of power and status and so on if you learn from somebody else and rather than insist on your own opinion, I guess. I think there's also issues having to do with how we think about knowledge and how we think about language. So there are various I think misunderstandings that get in the way of communication.
Who do you take as your influences in this model? Is it philosophical? Do you have any icons?
That's a good question. In a way, I would say no. I don't have any icons in this. I haven't in my life been very prone to having idols or so on that I strongly look up to. I've always been inspired by lots of people. I haven't yet encountered anyone who knows everything. We all have weaknesses in our understandings of things. So I try to seek clues from lots of places. But I think if I were to name one person in this context, it would be Ralph Stacey, who was a researcher in management in the UK. Very insightful about the complexity of human relations, you could say. And he had an understanding of organizational life that was very much oriented to thinking of them as conversations. So that whatever is going on between people is very much a kind of conversation.
That's beautiful, because it puts the word conversation in a more generative context, whereas we think of not necessarily as conversations as anything other than something we do in fika or dinner or in the pub. But then on the other hand, we have debate and politics and discussion, but the dialogue thing, it doesn't kind of sit. It's like that void in the middle.
Yeah, and I think that his use of the word conversation is general. It covers, debate, discussion, dialogue. It covers any way that we communicate by talking, and even it also includes written communication. That's a kind of conversation as well. So he used the term in a very general sense.
So I'm thinking about intuition now, and because obviously we could talk about Bohm, who's one of my influences in the field of dialogue. But I'm very interested in trusting of the self, and I suppose that leads towards what this word feeling, which you mention quite often, and I'm curious about that, and how we can agree. I think it's something you said in one of our written conversations. We have to agree that something's possible first of all, and then move towards seeing disagreements with curiosity, and then would you say that that's the stage where the feeling comes in? Is it some kind of process?
I don't believe that I use the word feeling in a very sort of consistent or specific sense, but I would say that I think that dialogue is very much about communicating intuitions. That I believe that all our understanding is actually intuitive in a way. Everything that we somehow understand is an intuitive understanding. Mm-hmm. We try to put words to that understanding when we communicate. So we try to express our intuitions in words, but the words can never capture the intuition itself. It can only give clues. So if I tell you something and you try to understand what I mean, you really need to see that as a clue and see if it resonates with your intuition somehow. And I think in that context, I guess I use the word feeling now and then as kind of synonymous with intuition or so.
Yeah.
But it's also, intuition and emotion, I think, are related very much. So really, what we communicate, I think, are intuitions about stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it strikes me that, and again, I hear myself not wanting to make assumptions about the world because it's so easy to do that. But it's something about our being which, like you say, words can only point to an experience and a feeling. You can't. Experiences and feelings, they can be described. You can't actually put it in a test tube and say, I've got some feeling here in this test tube.
No, and the description is always going to be inaccurate and incomplete.
So is this then about the power in the relationship? And are we talking about the relationship between people, or are you more talking about the relationship between meaning and self, if there is such a thing?
I mean, I would be, of course, it has to do with meaning and the self, but I would be more inclined to think in terms of between people. I think very much what we use each other for is to try and grapple with our intuitions.
I think we should more.
Yeah. So I think I mean, we can never, our intuitions are kind of vague, and we never know if they are accurate or not, because our intuitions are sometimes wrong. We when we put words to our intuitions and we get the response back, that makes the intuition hopefully a little bit more understandable and sensible. So we help each other to navigate our intuitions, you could say. That's what I believe.
Yeah, and so where you say, let's move on to your interest with the possibility of approaching disagreements in a different way, but also in the context of the written dialogue, and this intention that we have to agree that it's possible together. And that speaks to me about contracting, particularly in coaching and group work.
So I think it's in order to have dialogue, we need to believe that it's possible, and we need to have the intention to make it possible.
So do you want to say a little bit about the difference between the voice and the written word in dialogue? Because it appears that that's what you're really interested in.
So I think maybe need to go back a little bit to the origin of that question, which is that I brought up on your forum, your online forum, Dialogue Village, where people exchange messages in writing. I put up the question, how can we have dialogue in writing? And I believe it is possible to have written dialogue, although it is more difficult. So when we communicate in writing, we tend to invoke more like a discussion mode of communication. But I believe that we can learn to have more of a dialogue mode of communication, even in writing. And I think a big reason why it's more difficult in writing is that we only have the words in writing. So when we communicate now, there is so much that we convey also in voice and also in facial expressions and so on. So when I try to convey my intuition to you, then the words are only clues, and the context in which we are talking, including my body language and voice and so on, helps you to try and understand what I might mean, I think.
I think that's really interesting, because I'm seeing obviously one stage further is in person.
Yeah.
So compared to the written word, we have these online, we have these extra visual communication, but in person there's that's the ultimate.
Yeah. So when we meet face to face in person, we have an even richer the sound quality is better. Just one thing, and we see the whole body. We hear the body of each other, and so on. And some people think that smell even plays a role there. I don't know, but yeah. So we need to somehow empathize with the other person, to try to understand what goes on for the other person, try to understand each other. So the richer the material we have in that communication, the easier it is. But I do believe that even when we are there in person with each other, we are actually the interpretation is very much an imaginative act. I have to imagine what you mean by what you say to me. I can never know that. I always have to guess what it is that you might mean, and my guess is going to be reflected in how I respond to you, and then that helps you to understand whether I understood what you meant, and we go back and forth. So it's very much a process of imagining what the other person might mean, even when we are there face to face, even when we are touching each other and so on. It's an imaginative communication, and so we just, I think that imaginative part has to be based on trust. It has to be based on compassion and so on. And if we can use that, then that helps us to understand when we are communicating in writing as well. So we just have to rely a little bit more on our imagination, you could say.
Yeah, they are transferable measures into the writing, into the written mode. Yeah, I was also struck by when you said smells, and I think that I don't know much about pheromones and chemicals that we give off also
Yeah.
For different reasons. The body's designed that way. Yeah, and then written dialogue. We have different kinds of luxuries. We have the luxury of time and editing, of course,
yeah.
and we have some of those in this, as we'll probably be editing out that door squeaking and things like that. There it goes again. So, what are your reasons for researching then at this level? Have you got any reasons, or is it more of is it more personal? Or
oh no, I have pretty high ambitions.
Good.
They're not very specific, but I really want to do as much as I can to contribute to changing the way people communicate with each other, and I think we influence each other a lot, whether we want to or not. So as long as we walk around as living human beings, we influence other people around us by the way that we are, and by the way that we behave, and if we are deliberate about that, I think we can have a lot of influence, especially when there is a disposition to change. And I think that there is a disposition to change towards dialogue in the world. I think I speak to so many different people in different walks of life about this topic, and everyone seems to agree that there is a lack of dialogue. Even if they haven't really thought so much about it before, they can recognize this thread, and so there is a sort of latent need for dialogue in the world, and I want to do what I can to contribute to filling that need in some sense, or contributing to a change, because I think we are constantly changing how we communicate with each other. This is a cultural thing which is constantly changing, and whether we want it or not. And if we can be deliberate about changing how we communicate more towards dialogue, I think we can do that. So that's the reason why I spend my efforts on this. I want to contribute to change in society, but I believe that we need more understanding of the topic itself. So I think there is a need for research in a sense. So I describe myself as a dialogue researcher, because I think that there is more. We need to understand dialogue better in order to be successful in making this change. And I think I would like to see what I can do to contributing to that.
Just one final point on that, and I noticed somebody asked you on your really interesting LinkedIn thread. Somebody asked you about being defensive and how we can avoid that. What would you say to that?
There's so much. I mean, I think, first of all, I'm not so sure that we should avoid being defensive. I think if we avoid it too much, then we will avoid to even talk about the disagreements. And I think it's really important that we do talk about the disagreements that we have, and we're gonna care about our own opinion, and I think that's a good thing. That people care about their opinions about things. That's a good thing. So there's going to be engagement in the opinions that we have, and sometimes, so when those opinions clash in conversation, if there's a lot of emotion behind that, then there's going to be an emotional reaction, and we will spontaneously get defensive in that situation, and I don't think that's I mean, I do think we can do a lot to avoid it, but I think we should also accept that sometimes it happens, and when it happens, it's a sign that this is something which is important to us. So I believe the important thing is to be able to notice when it happens, so that we can, instead of being captured by that defensiveness and remain forever defensive around that we can actually notice that now we got defensive about this. Can we come back to curiosity again? Can we perhaps even see this defensiveness as part of the information that can help us understand what's going on here?
Yeah, well, that's I think that's a beautiful place to end on, and I'm really fascinated to hear about your journey, and from setting up this company, artificial intelligence, and having a natural interest in communication, interpersonal communication, and to where you are now, and it's really been fascinating talking to you. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you, and I hope to spend more time talking with you. Thanks, likewise, Johnny, and I hope that I can interview you one day about your interesting work with autism dialogue and all of that in the village. That's lovely. I'm sure I'll be happy to do that. Thanks very much, and have a nice day. You too. Thanks. Take care. Take care. Bye.